Greetings, Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I am a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you're here. My guest today carries two names, Robert Doore and Rides at the Door. He was born in Havre, Montana, and raised on the Blackfeet Reservation in Browning, Montana. He has made a journey that most maps don't draw. From Big Red football on the reservation to the highest-ranking Native American in the National Football League since Jim Thorpe. He sat inside a league, inside a franchise, while his own people asked that franchise to change its name. Today, he is the president and CEO of Chief Mountain Sports and Consulting, a connector and a coach who says you'll figure out how much he loves people in the first 60 seconds. Robert, welcome to Curated Questions.
Thank you, Ken. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. I always like to start the conversation at the same point, and that is kind of the baseline for listeners and the guest, and that is, when did you first understand the power of questions?
You know, as I reflect on that question, I think about maybe I could blow your socks off and say early on in my career. But the fact is I didn't learn it till later in my career. And here's why. I think in society, we're set to individually tell how cool we are, right? In kindergarten, grade school, residential school, boarding school, where I went to school, you had to prove that you were the best, right? Individuality was celebrated. We live in a society where with social media, if you don't tell people you're cool, you're not cool. So we grow up individualized in a sense. And it wasn't till pivotal time later that I learned how to ask questions. It takes courage to ask questions. And that was the start of my leadership journey. And how it began was asking one of my mentors is, how did you become so well-read? We're sitting in a room of people that seemed super intelligent, and I felt intimidated. And it took courage to ask him that. It also took courage to say, I don't know. And he said, be well-read and ask lots of questions. You'll find people are willing to share some things about them, their accomplishments that you can learn from, but also ask the questions is, how did you do it? So how do you successful? How do you become X, Y, and Z? So those questions I didn't learn till later in life. So I think that's where society, we talk about you want to be a future leader, a leader today, tomorrow. It's asking those questions early on. And I think that's where I was in conflict with myself and my native culture, because self-actualization is what we started with. We were asking questions early on, and we were trained to be leaders in our culture at an earlier age than mainstream society was teaching us. And it was asking questions kind of contradicted our culture in the sense of we're humble characters. We listen first versus talk first. So that questioning was after I learned the game later on in my career. So the power of questions, though, to use a Star Wars analogy, was the ways of mastering the Jedi Force.
Nice. Love that tie-in. Well, now, so going back, your question to that mentor, how is it you became so well read? What was it that in your curiosity? I mean, how'd you even get to that question? What was happening?
It was DC Tour 1. So I moved from the reservation in northwestern Montana in Blackfeet, and I moved from there to Washington, D.C. That was my first real job. And by divine intervention, that's a whole other story, but I was able to secure a position in D.C., the most powerful city in the world, right? Arguably. And I leaned into, this was before the internet and cell phones, so I had to lean into my network, which was very, very small. I tell the young people my Rolodex was small, but a mentor took me in that came from my background, my community, and he had already gone and trailblazed. So it was key that I connected with him. There was no formal be my mentor. It was just kind of like, dude, I'll show you the ropes of DC.
Yeah.
And he took me into rooms. He showed me how to dress. He showed me how to conduct myself. He showed me how to be taken seriously at that level. And now you got to remember, when I first moved there, my boss told me, I'm going to have your cubicle ready. And I looked at her and I said, what the heck's a cubicle? That's how raw and real it was. But it was surrounding myself with these mentors like this gentleman who was the highest ranking Native American in the Pentagon. So we're sitting in this room of these educated leaders and people from all walks of the country. There was 2 and 4-star generals there. I remember this. I remember some leaders from the cabinet, and I just happened to be in this room, and I didn't realize the magnitude at the time until years later as I reflected. And they're having this coffee conversation, and I'm blown away because I don't have a clue what they're talking about. And so on the drive home, I said, how did you guys get to be so smart? Right? I'm 21 years old, and I'm still wet behind the ears, confident, maybe cocky. I had no idea what they were talking about. Like the square root of pi, it was nuclear physics to me. It wasn't. As we look back at some of those conversations, he says, just be well read. Know a little bit about a lot of things. And ask questions. That was the other pivotal thing, was ask questions. And open-ended questions. And extroverts and people like to show how smart they are in some of these rooms.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's part of the courage that it took to ask those questions is being in those rooms, of which I find now is there's people in some of these rooms that aren't as smart and as well read.
True that. Yes. That is the case. Yes. You had also mentioned in your coming up years that just your culture, or how I interpreted it, how I heard it, was that there was a leadership expectation within the culture that you grew up. Did I hear that right? Or can you expand on that a little bit?
One of the beautiful things about my culture is people ask, how did you do it? How did you go from the reservation to the NFL to corporate leadership? And it's being firmly grounded in my culture, in the values and the foundation. And I teach a course that's titled Culture is Your Superpower. Now, culture isn't just native culture. Culture be the culture of a company, a community, whatever. So culture was a universal word that I used there. But our culture in particular, Native American values, is based on things like respect, communication, honor. And as I rose up, I kept those as my foundation to connect with people. Because I don't care what color you are, there's a really neat connection when you share those common values, right? Mission-driven people tend to find each other. But here's the one thing that not a lot of people, and I'm loving the opportunity to share with your audience, is Abraham Maslow. His concept and theory of the hierarchy of needs was turned on its head when he spent the summer with us Blackfeet, right? So if you're listening, Google it right now. Abraham Maslow spending the summer with the Blackfeet. He learned that we started as Blackfoot people. Self-actualization that's where we started. And it turned everything on its head. People don't realize that whole theory and concept, we had an impact on there. So the greater impact is I began to lean into what did we as Native Americans contribute to today's society and all the things, some of the fundamental things from government to culture of a company. I use that in the NFL, managing large labor forces. My culture was the centerpiece, and that was, again, communication, connection, respect, deliverance, leveling up. So with our culture, we have leaders, yes, but they walk alongside us. They don't walk in front of us. My ancestry, my heritage, my people, usually when there's something significant going on in this country with Native Americans or in general, there's probably a Blackfeet in the middle of it.
Love it.
So one example is Chief Two Guns Whitecalf, right? A member of our tribe. He was a leader. He was an interpreter, and he's on the head nickel. He was also the logo for the Washington Redskins, now Commanders. So there was a deep connection with just that. And there's a lot of different connections with my people across the country and the impact that they've done. To Eloise Cabell, there's another great example. Eloise Cabell was a chief plaintiff in the largest case against the United States government in their accounting to Native people. Billions and billions of dollars was won by her efforts. And she's kind of like the Aaron Brockovich of Indian country, where she represented lots of people with the miscalculation and accounting situation with the United States government and Indian people and trust land.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for the specific names. Somewhere along the line, I did read about Maslow and his journey with the Blackfeet. And I don't remember what book it was that I was reading or where that came up, but I'll go back and take another round turn on that to dig a little bit deeper. Now, as you say, these characteristics are within the culture. Now, as I think back in my growing up years, and I think about what was culture or not, probably didn't even so much have a name for it, but it seems like, as you're describing this, that this is a part of a intentional discussion within the community. Is that, am I understanding that to be correct, or kind of
Yeah,
making that leap okay?
absolutely. So I'll go back to this first job in DC, right?
Hmm.
I'm a young man, a young Terp just starting out his career. And I'm setting policy or influencing and helping set policy or writing a grant for the country. That's the magnitude of this young person from the reservation. What occurred to me is I was teaching Indian 101 at the level that they're passing these policies and regulations and discussions. What they didn't have was just basic understanding of who we are. They wanted to generalize and be lazy about who we are as Native people, right?
Yeah.
In the lower 48 alone, there's almost 600 tribes, federally recognized tribes. There's a deeper conversation versus federal and state recognized tribes, but there's a lot of tribes, 600 tribes. And each one of those in pockets of the country are unique. They have their own government. They have their own language. They have their own culture. There's a uniqueness for each of them, but it's hard to pass a general law, right? Or a general something, but it's easy to have a general understanding. So I'll put it in context for my Indigenous and my Hispanic side, right? If you look at the Latino, Hispanic, different parts of the country, we refer to ourselves as Hispanic, Latino, Chicano. There's different ways we refer to that. Even the Spanish dialect is a little different in different parts of the country. If you look at that. So within the layers, there's layers. So if you think about tribes, there's layers within layers. So what is unique to the Navajo may not be shared with the Blackfeet and Sioux, Umatilla, and all these different tribes across the country. So they're right there is very complex, but it's not heavy. You just have to learn basic 101 Indian culture and communication, as I call it. So behavioral intelligence, and that's important. So as I taught these people that are passing these laws, that it's not as easy as saying all Indians are this. We don't agree, right? We don't have this Zoom meeting of all Indians.
You're not a monolith? What? Come on. It's one box on the census, right? Or yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah.
But one thing we do have is a unique story, right? Sovereignty that was granted is Indian people, Indian nations can govern themselves, government to government relationships. There's a law there that's saying that we sign treaties that should be honored, and that there's a whole conversation there with sovereignty that we govern ourselves. So there's a basic understanding too that Indians get free health care and free this, no taxes. No, we do. We pay taxes. We don't get free health care. So there's a basic understanding that has been largely influenced, Ken, by people in your neighborhood of media, right? Romanticized. That in early on media, if you look at how we were painted as Native people, we were warriors raping and pillaging and all this craziness. And then you look at Disney's version of Pocahontas and John Smith is this great guy. He abducted her. She was like a young teenager. That was the first abduction. But the Disney version makes you think, oh gosh, we were so great. That's not the case. What I like today is there's some real life examples because of Native artists that are showing our story. I walk and talk and look like the guy on 5 o'clock news because my gift as a member of my community is being able to take the reservation and our tribal life to mainstream society and then bring it back. That's what my ancestors, my grandfather was interpreter and businessman. So that's my gift. I know that. I was asked to work for many, many tribes in many local communities, but I think I'm most impactful on a larger scale where I can be a liaison and connector of the two worlds.
Gotcha. I grew up in central Arizona, so my schooling included the Native American tribes in Arizona and the Westerns and things like that, right out of Hollywood. So that formed my worldview regarding the indigenous people. And that was what I really thought the sum total was. And then I joined the Navy. That took me to Connecticut. And I'm like, there's all these Indian names or Native. Mashantucket, that doesn't sound like Smith, right? Pequot, that doesn't sound like Smith or whatever. And I'm like, and these rivers, those are not English sounding rivers, right? That that would have come across with the Puritans or whatever. And I'm like, wait a second. And then the more I just learned about the country, I'm like, no, there were native peoples everywhere. And it was probably about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that, where I was driving up north on 95 through like North Carolina into Virginia. And it's just the wall of trees on either side, right? It's just pine trees, and it is virtually impenetrable, right? And I was just dumbstruck. I was like, man, it must have been brutal for the settlers when they first came here to hit the shores and be met with this massive wall of trees and the need to start at the shoreline and cut your way into this country. And it's like, no, that's not true at all. That's not how it worked. There were millions of people here, farmland already cultivated, right? All these points of shoreline. No, it wasn't a wall of trees. And so just the myths that I've even believed, and this is like 5 or 6 years ago where I had that, where that hit me. And then it was the quick calibration of going, no, that is incorrect. And having to challenge my own mind and my own memory on the stories that we tell ourselves. And I'll say that through a whole deconstruction journey that I've been on, that An Indigenous People's History of the United States, that book was pivotal for me questioning the narrative that we have about the stories that we tell ourselves about this country. And it was so helpful to go back and understand those indigenous stories and the tribes and the people that were there and what the U.S. government did, all the broken treaties. When I was reading through it, I went back online to Amazon and looked at the 1-star reviews. Now it's like 2,500 rated 4.6 or 7 or something like that. So it's had a lot of people read it and rate it well. But there was one comment that said, there was a 1-star review that said, this is filled with half-truths. Okay, so let's take that at face value for a second. I disagree with the comment because it's so well researched and all the rest. But let's pretend that that comment is true for a moment. What do I do with 50% of that being true? So if we just tore the book in half and I said this first half or the latter half, it doesn't matter, all of that is true, what does that say about my understanding of the American story and what I believe to be true? And that to me was damning. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, all of this requires a rewrite and relearning and needing to go back and understand, because I now don't believe the story. And so the indigenous stories or the history in America has been pivotal in helping me to better understand who we are as a country and as a people. So yeah, those are some of the things that happened to me on the collapsing of the veil for me.
Well, I appreciate that enlightening moment. I think back, it just reminded me of growing up in my home and the inspiration that I received being grounded in who I am and the half-truths. And I was raised as an internal optimist, right? My grandmother told me that, Bobby, you come from a seed of abundance. We all do, right? I never felt like I didn't have anything. I didn't feel like the system was against me or anything like that. What I looked at is what are the opportunities here, right? Mm-hmm. And in using your example, what occurred to me was that there's a lot of people that are uneducated about half-truths. So are we going to boil the ocean? Some people, and God bless them, they're trailblazers in that space about education and righting some wrongs. For me, I think about my research when my dad told me about Chief Two Guns White Calf and Jim Thorpe. Back then, as you probably remember, is we couldn't Google on our phones and have it in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
You went to the library and I pulled out the cards and I learned about Jim Thorpe. I learned about Carlisle Indian School and how they shipped our children off to these boarding schools across the country in the States and Canada. Now, The pessimist or the detractor might say, oh God, that was horrible. But here's what I always do is I try to look at what is the lemonade in the lemon. And for me, it was Jim Thorpe's story and how he came to Carlisle in school, where General Pratt, he had coined the phrase, kill the end and save the man, right?
Hmm.
As brutal as that is, it's easy to say, oh God, there are atrocities and stuff. Yes, it was awful.
Yeah.
But he was preparing for what is coming in this country. And some of the students there, like Jim Thorpe and others, sports was a mechanism to display their athleticism. But Jim also leaned into his culture of who he is as a Native man, a Sac and Fox member. And also he can be educated. So he used the platform of culture, education, and sports to tell his story. By the way, not a lot of people realize that when Jim Thorpe and all of his brothers and sisters were playing sports, they were coached by a guy named Glenn Pop Warner. Pop Warner.
Wow.
And in his story, he used that to launch him into all these different spaces of being an educated, but showing the world that he could be an athlete, educated, and businessman, right? That was super important to me. And it resonated in my soul of, wow, you could still be Indian, still compete on mainstream society, and still keep your culture. That made a lot of sense to me. It just inspired me to be like, I could be like that. Then I found out he was the first president of the NFL, the National Football League. Jim Thorpe, who went to boarding school, came from my roots, humble roots, faced the same challenges of maneuvering through two worlds, but he used his platform to launch him into different levels, right? And he became an Olympic athlete. He became a pro baseball player. He became a pro football player, but he was the first president of the NFL. Why is the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio? It's because Jim Thorpe. Jim Thorpe played for the Canton Bulldogs. And that was the biggest draw at the time. It was like everybody came to see Jim Thorpe, right? And there were so many other Native Americans that were athletes that blended, that used his template, including me. It wasn't until 100 years later that I became the highest ranking Native American in the NFL. But they did not hire me because I was a token Indian. They hired me because I was a capable, competent individual, right? Yeah. And that was super important to me because I knew I worked twice as hard to reach that level. But I wanted to pay homage to those that had came before me. So there was Jim Thorpe, there was Billy Mills, two Olympic medalists. Not only were they Native American, but they were some of the greatest Americans that we've ever seen, right? For what they had to go through, their story, borrowed shoes, they won. Billy Mills wasn't even supposed to win the 10,000 meters in Tokyo in 1964. And he won it in borrowed shoes. He was an alternate, and he was battling suicide ideation, type 2 diabetes. So those two individuals inspired me that I can do it, number one, with hard work and all the accolades that come with it. You don't set out to do that. You can blend your culture. If you do it right, people will recognize. That's super important to me. So I patterned my life after these that came before us that inspired me and showed me I did belong in these rooms. So it's super important. You could talk about all day long about the wrongs, or you can just lean into it and just carve your own story and write the greatest story of your life. And if you just happen to be Native, that's fantastic. But I think the last thing I'll say to this point is representation changes the game. For me, I realized that when I made it to the NFL, high profile. And after you get over the initial shock, this is a dream job, you realize that what it took to get there and all the people you represent. So there's a level of stress, and there's no such thing as a dream job, and there's no such thing as a stress-free life, no matter what color you are. We all go through this, right? So there was connection points that were being made. But one time I'm sitting in my corner office with the big view, right? And this young Hispanic man indigenous Hispanic man come up to my office, and he was on the wrong floor. And the security guard just happened to be off duty. He comes into my office and he says, "Wait, who are you?" I told him. He goes, "But you're from my community." Oh, so we can do this. That's exactly what this young man, that was me. I was staring in the mirror some decades later. Yeah. But he, at that moment, said to himself, I can be that, without me telling anything other than who I am. So representation changes the game.
as you have embraced all of your identities and given them, my term, kind of equal space as you show up, have there been questions or inquiry or curiosity that you've gone through to be able to arrive to where you are at as fully seated self, as Audre Lorde talks about, in your identities and who you are? Because we got the social media screens rolling through saying, well, whatever you are, you're not good enough. You need to be different, or you need to buy this product, or you need to change, or whatever. So what did that look like for you in relation to how inquiry, curiosity questions help you arrive at that fully seated self, to be confident in who you are?
It's a game changer. So what I tell young people today is nothing is permanent. It evolved over time. I had to be comfortable with it. There was challenges. Life is not a linear path, straightforward. It's these dips and valleys. And one time I was in a valley, my brother was just shot, murdered, and I went home to reset, regroup. And mentorship is super important, because I leaned in and asked a mentor. I said, I'm struggling. Am I white? Because I want white success. Or am I native? So you struggle with that cultural identity. You struggle with imposter syndrome. You struggle with a lot of the pressures of, do I belong in this room or that room? Well, I, like a lot of Americans, have different blood in me, but people see me as one blood. This country we base a lot of things on race.
Yeah.
But again, being the optimist, I wanted to prove them wrong. And it's important for me that I stay focused on who I am. So that changed, and I had to get more and more comfortable with maneuvering through both worlds. So in other words, when I went to mainstream downtown New York City or DC or LA, I had a different game face on. And one of my mentors told me, when you walk into those rooms, you have to speak what they speak. You have to be articulate. And every minority knows this. And even a woman would know this, right? There's microaggressions that go on in offices. There's things that you say and do. There's a lot of pressure. And sometimes you just want to be a professional that one day and not be so sharp. You feel like you need to be on point all the time.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the challenges. And I don't know the lens of a woman, but I do know the challenges of being a minority and being the only one in these rooms. Because if you screw up, people will judge you and say, see, I told you, you give them a chance, and that's what happened. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But what I did is I welcome that pressure. A lot of people from my community, we talk about historical trauma, lateral oppression. Those things happen. They have happened. Instead of looking at that as a reason why I fail, I looked at it as a fuels my gut to work harder, right? These ancestors you talk about coming to this country, oh my God, the challenge you face. My ancestors were survivors. They were thrivers. And people focus more on the survival side of it. I focus more on the thrivers. So I come from a generation where if they didn't kill it, then I wouldn't have this opportunity. I wouldn't meet fine folks like you. So that's that thriver mentality that I encourage. I'm tired of the survival narrative, because we are all given a fair opportunity. That seed of abundance I talk about. We really need to focus. Americans, we have an opportunity. You can make excuses or make a life. You cannot do both.
I'll just let that sit for a moment. Yeah, I love that. How do let's say, start with the Blackfeet Nation, right? But indigenous peoples and tribes that you've witnessed, how are questions and inquiry fostered and encouraged within the communities there? Because at this point, we see a lot of, this is your critical thinking process, this is your whatever processes we have in most textbooks or something like that. And I wonder if there's other ancient wisdom that is overlooked or forgotten regarding questions and inquiry and curiosity that perhaps some of the indigenous tribes may have held on to and been passing along, that has just been ignored in other cases or just not heard of. Any ideas?
Well, I think it goes back to communication. Easy to say, hard to do, right? So if you look at where I was raised, if you look at the two different ways we communicate, I'll give you two examples. One, when you meet a tribal elder, when you come to the reservation, people have this romanticized, if you don't know tribal people, right, you should learn protocol. Just like when you go to Europe, you should learn a little bit of how the country is there. When you go to Hawaii, you should learn about the Hawaiian culture and have an idea. And you should ask lots of questions, right? Is it okay? And get it, because natives really, because of the historical distrust that was laid by us being very nice, gracious hosts and teachers and welcoming people, right, the game was laid on top of us and our culture. And so there's that historical distrust. But once you break through and establish trust by asking questions, there's such a neat dichotomy that develops because you end up learning about each other. And I think that's, as Native people, when you meet an elder, you don't give them a firm handshake, look them in the eye. That's a sign of disrespect. You wouldn't know that because if you raised in mainstream society, you're a shady character if you don't give that firm handshake, look them in the eye.
Exactly. Yeah.
What I had found out is if I sit back and listen and observe and not be the first to speak, whereas some of us speak lots and loud, right? You learn how the game is played. And that's really where the secret sauce of my success is. I learned how to be a maverick and put on different facades and and learn how to communicate. No different than, and I'll break it down for somebody that works for a corporation, right? If you walk into these different departments and you've got this fantastic idea, you've got to be able to speak marketing to the marketing team. You got to be able to speak legal to the legal team. You got to speak accounting to the accountants, right? Yep. In terms that are relatable and valuable. So you figure out where that music happens, and then you're on the same sheet of music, no different than Indian country. If you really want to lean into who we are as Native people, get to know us first. We value relationship over transaction. We're spiritually led. I give a lot of inspirational talks. I give a lot of keynote speaking from large and small operations. And I'm a spiritually led individual. I don't hide away from my spiritual soundness, who I am as Native people. If somebody said you got to take God, and it's happened, you got to take God out of your speech, in your spirituality, I don't sign the contract. I can't do it because that's who I am. Unapologetic when it comes to being a spiritual being. And that's who Indian people are, is we're spiritually led people. But the romanticize that has come out of the media and stuff like that, sometimes we'll ask what we think is a safe question and it might not land. But as Indian people, what we'll do is we'll tease you hard, and we'll laugh, because humor is huge in our community. And we like to laugh first. Big wig with this, this body of work, and I come back home and I am humble beyond belief. So just establish trust through communication and asking the right questions. I mean, do some research. We have the privilege of looking at the internet and find out who the people are and what's important to them, and ask those curious questions. Find out who some leaders are. Find out there's people like me that are willing to go and engage with community members. There's people that need to have trust established first before they'll open up to you. Dances with Wolves is a great romantic movie. I like it because it showed us in a different light, that we weren't these heathen savages raping and pillaging. We took you in and we provided for you. You became a member of our tribe, right? Fast forward to Yellowstone. I don't look at Yellowstone as like, oh my God, it's killing and it's crazy, it's trauma. What I really identified with Yellowstone is that there's natives in there that are businessmen and women, capable, competent, educated, know how to play the game. Super, super, super important to me that they're telling the truth of who we are today. You know, the National Native American Hall of Fame, of who I represent, we tell the stories of these individuals because you could be sitting next to a Native American and not realize it. Why? Because the media has taught you that we need to be beads, feathers, and turquoise up, that's how we should look. Yeah. You don't look Indian. Well, what am I supposed to be doing? Like, because I'm dressed like you, some of the inductees wore suit and ties. John Harrington is the first Native American astronaut. He's wearing NASA gear. There's tons of examples I can give you of folks that you probably have seen, worked, or never even heard of that are Native American.
So where is the Native American Hall of Fame located at?
That's a great question. The National Native American Hall of Fame is located in Oklahoma City.
Okay.
Oklahoma City. and celebrating the stories of the impactful Native Americans in 16 different categories. So Hall of Fame, it's not just an induction ceremony. It's a celebration of these impactful people that have gone before us. So I have an opportunity. You see, Jim Thorpe is in there for a number of reasons. But without Jim Thorpe or Billy Mills, there's no Robert Doore.
Right.
So it's a central place where we can tell our story, inspire, educate, and use it as a platform to become a successful individual. Success is defined on your terms. But the Hall of Fame is a celebration of all that. So it's not just more than plaques and induction ceremonies. It's us sharing our story with the country, inspiring people from all walks of life, right? Because I think outside of the African-American community, there's not a community that's hard-pressed to tell you how tough the struggle has actually been to make it. So for me to be here, I'm a unicorn.
Yeah.
I'm an absolute unicorn.
Yeah. As you mentioned at the top, 600 tribes across the country, and something for listeners to do is to find out who their local tribes are and historically who had been there. On the audio version of this podcast, I always say that this is recorded on Piscataway land because I want to acknowledge the longer history of this area and who has been here before. But it took going and looking up a little bit and understanding. But there's tools out there, and I can put some tools in the show notes. But that idea of there's a long history here, and it goes very, very deep. I've been going down some rabbit holes here recently with some folks on YouTube that have been going out and backpacking deep into areas that are not built up in the Southwest and the like, and coming across ruins of people who have been there a long time ago. And it's like, I look at that and I'm like, how did they get water? Right? What was a day in the life like? And under this overhang, a sheet of rock had peeled off, and the people had ground out a little recess into the rock, probably for grinding and things like that. But there were literal corn cobs still in this. And the guys were like, probably 900 years old. And it's like, just the reality that this is true, that people used to make this place a home. But it's like, there is a long story here of, like you say, not just surviving, but also the thriving. It's been a joy to see how people have thrived in what I would consider unthrivable locations, and yet they have. And so It's been beautiful to be able to see. So I would encourage folks, find out who lived on the land before you did. Go figure it out.
Well, I think one of the biggest stories that people don't realize is that most recently, in the last couple of years, a member from my tribe, a distant relative, did a DNA test and proved we have been here for 50,000 years. So tracing those roots back in those roots. And it's important that we do these things like land acknowledgement. I see these sporting events that I'm a part of. I still work in pro sports entertainment, and I go all over the country or meetings, and they do these land acknowledgements, which is important and valuable. But I think, to your point, two examples I want to bring up is, one, yes, it's great that you acknowledge that we were here first, but it's better, to your point, of go learn about those people. Go on, lean into some of the culture that was here before, right? You really engage with that homeland of those people, because that's home. The two other examples I'll give you is my son. My son was struggling with, he sees the world in slow motion. He can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 30 seconds, all 6 sides, without taking the stickers off.
Well, that was my cheat code, by the way, but okay, keep going. So kudos to him, right?
and he could see things, the end result in math. And so the teachers were like, you got to show your work, got to show your work. It was simple. He saw the end. He could solve a riddle without showing his work. And then there was Spanish, like learning Spanish. And he'd come home, he's like, Dad, how come you didn't teach me Spanish? I said, because I don't know it. I didn't speak it. We weren't taught that first. I said, but let me tell you something, son. Here's where representation matters. Here's what's in your DNA, son, is those two things you're learning right now are learned, math and Spanish. That's in your DNA. It comes from your indigenous side. You see, our ancestors were building temples and using pi and pi r squared before anything. And they built these amazing structures. And there was trade routes that were passed back and forth. And we were calculating the stars. And so we were using all these things that they're teaching you in school. It's all native based. Something snapped and clicked inside of his head that gave him a sense of pride, that he had a secret superpower, kind of like his dad, that showed him a sense of pride. That engineering, when we build our lodges, our teepees, that was the first mobile home. That particulate matter, we talked about this, when you're sitting in a meeting and all the windows and doors are closed and people are getting tired in those meetings, you open up a door, watch what happens. The energy comes back because the fresh air is needed. We had that with our teepees where we'd open up the flaps and circulate the fresh air. It was the first mobile home. So we have engineers and architects and geographers. We have all these things that were in our system. We just didn't have a title. And my son leaned into that and went back. Now he's fluent Spanish. He's teaching teachers about geography and stuff like that. And his superpower is he's good at these things, largely because he's proud of who he is. Super important. And the last thing I'll tell you is when people were complaining about the Redskin name, and there was a pastor that called me, and he had thousands of followers, and he said, we're not going to watch the games or buy merchandise. And that's our way of demonstrating how we support Native Americans. So I'm not going to get into the debate of the name and stuff because that's a whole different conversation. What I told this pastor, I said, I appreciate the call. I said, but if you truly want to help Native Americans, let me take you home to my reservation. Let me take you home to Navajo Nation. Let me take you home to certain parts of this country, and they don't have some basic needs. So before you take your followers into third world countries and help bring clean water to them, you know, the last time I was able to get a drink of water at my mom's home, now this is 2026, it was last year, running water, and we live next to Butcher Path, basic infrastructure. So there's things we can do with our own brothers and sisters here in this country, but it's also a two-way street, right? Natives need to meet us halfway. And so that was a collective conversation. If you really want to truly make impact, it's not sports and merchandise and it's going to meet them where they're at. Meet us where they're at. Find people like me, connect with people like me. I can also teach you stuff about leadership in your corporation, how I blend my superpower and how we connect with people, how we motivate, because leadership in itself has evolved over time.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that's a whole deeper conversation too. So I'm a good connector of the two worlds. When a young man told me, and I'll wrap it up with this point, when I went home, now I'm all polished up, right? Suit and tie. And by the way, hit the res with a suit and tie. Watch you get teased there. So I give this electrifying speech to the community or the high school. And this young man walks up and he says, hey, you're not from here, huh? You don't know how tough it is here. You don't even know what a war cry is. And so I said, He says, do you even know what a war cry is? And I said, what's your name again? He says, my name's Ken. I said, what? He looked at me like, what the heck? This polished up guy. But I connected and showed him, I'm from here, man. I'm from here. And I can sing the songs. And I'd also talk to him in our tongue, in our native tongue. And it just changed the way he looked at the world because he had it convinced that he was defeated. He couldn't dream. He couldn't do any of these things. But then I did it. And I could sing the songs. I could talk our language. I could go to DC and New York and come back home and still be us. And that is really something that is powerful to me. And that's the point where I'm at in my career, or how do I elevate and give the next person? They don't have to be Native American. Yeah. All we want in this country is a chance in the race. That's it. And watch what happens. Those that have that magic ability to work hard, to get it done, face adversity, process it, find mentors, communicate, respect, watch the magic happen. Success is what you define, what you make of it. Just get us in the race. And that's what I want to do, is find people that are willing to roll up their sleeves. And you can't duplicate my story. Yeah. My story is absolutely unique, but you can take things from my story and apply them to yours.
By virtue of you telling your story and you owning the various elements of your story, it does kick the door open for others to look at their story, whatever it is, like you said. It doesn't have to just be Native But whatever your story is, whatever your DNA handed you, whatever that story looks like, and own that. For those that don't know or haven't seen the video, I'm a middle-aged white dude. Okay, got it. But my family has a story and we can trace it back.
Yes.
And there's actually been some moments of great pride in that story of that lineage. Not pride as in better than anyone else, but in the pride in the story of. And it has felt a bit like a superpower. I'll give just a little piece. So if you trace a family crest goes back to 1215 or something like that. And the name Woodward is Warden of the Woods. And as I dove a little bit deeper into the understanding that, right, it's the Warden of the Woods is the one that would know what's going on in the woods and stop those who are doing bad things, hunting where they shouldn't. It wasn't necessarily the king, but it was, this is the role of the family. And it was, what does that look like? So that doesn't mean that I'm any better or worse than anyone else. It just means this is what that story looks like. So now as I'm doing this communicating and talking with people, it feels a little bit like carrying that story forward from that deep history of the family. And so what I would also say is for those that don't know as much of the story, if you can find it out, great. But even if you can't, you're also creating that story and you're discovering what those talents currently are. And you can start that trajectory going forward, even if you don't know the full story of the past. So yeah, as you're unfolding whatever that superpower is that's showing up every day.
Ken, your show is titled Curated Questions. And one of the things when I first meet somebody, whether it's virtual, in person, a grin and grip, or an eyebrow session, right, I say this: what's your story? Open-ended question like that, based on their personality, they'll take you on a journey where it organically happens to have a real conversation, right? Deeper than that. How was the weather? Did you watch the game? That's like that. Those questions are just terrible in my mind when you're trying to network and meet people. What's your story, man? Knowing that your name has history, your name and family lineage has history. You might take me down that road, but the most powerful questions are those open-ended questions. And I'll add with this, whether interviewing for a job or networking, show what you know by the questions you ask. That has been super powerful. And I've taught my kids that in the ways of the Jedi, right? My daughter just got accepted to Montana State University. Go Cats.
Oh, congratulations.
And she asked the dean, what inspired you to be the dean? And he proceeded to tell her, right? Because as human beings, again, going back to tell how cool we are, open-ended questions, when you find an extrovert or somebody that's really proud of who they are, they'll tell you. But they'll also reveal what's important to them. Because when I do business with people, I have to be value aligned. There's non-negotiable values in my process where I'll learn about you. I don't drink, smoke, or gamble. That's important to me. I'm a spiritual man, right? I'm a proud husband, proud father. These are non-negotiable things that I need in my life, and I do it in my business. I practice in my business. So those are important things. So by asking those open-ended questions, you'll start to figure out if that's a good fit or not, right? With your business or business partner or your network. So those open-ended questions are super, super important. And the last thing is being prepped, right? Prep for an interview, prep for a job interview, be prepared, right? In sports, that's what we do is when head-to-head competition, the guy that worked hard on you or girl that worked hard on you is probably going to win. Preparation is, don't underestimate the value of preparation for anything.
And how do you think that questions go into that or inform that practice of preparation?
Well, of course, depends on the setting, right? If you're a networking event or job interview, we have the pleasure of having access to a database of open-ended questions. Like, what are some smart questions? You'd probably throw in ChatGPT. What are smart questions to ask in networking, right? So we have the ability to do that. Some people, again, being the optimist, some people are worried about ChatGPT doing all the work, but it allows you to take care of the mundane stuff so you can be more creative. So to me, I dive deeper into what really matters. So I'll go in knowing somebody, where they went to college, where they went to school, whatever the internet has, I'm going to have that in my back pocket. I was a licensed lobbyist for private property rights. I knew going into these, the preparation that it required going into a testimony. I had databases and cases that I could refer to, but I needed to prepare for those things. So it depends. Researching your shows and what you stand for. I don't like to do a cold interview sometimes. I need to be able to figure out what your audience is about, what's going to resonate with your audience. Critical thinking, give you some pause. Some of the things that I identify as a leader, people ask, what are some things that keep you up at 3 a.m.? Me? That I'm a leader of people and corporations and profits, but I don't know everything. And that's a real fear that I've shared with other executives who've made thousands of dollars to multi-billion dollars. My network is such a wide gamut of different people, but the connection of, we have real fear that I don't know everything. Well, that's the smart ones. We'll hire a marketer, an accountant, somebody smarter than them in the room.
Yeah.
Now, and that's super important. So that preparation leading up to that, to go, maybe I'm not the best one for that. Let's find somebody. That's what true leadership in my mind is, finding others to help them succeed, supporting them, making them think critically in a sense that they're invested in the mission. Somebody comes into your office and says, I got this great idea. You look at it, and some of us, if we have a fixed mentality, say, oh, I see what's wrong with it. I'm going to make this better. A good leader will say, this is fantastic. How are we going to do this? And give them ownership and make sure that instead of the 30% profit that you see, they only see the 10%. How do you get them to see that 30%? That's by letting them go and fail, encouraging them, supporting them. And that's what good leaders do today. That's tribal leaders do. That's what good tribal leaders did, is really focused on the whole tribe.
So you've mentioned fear a couple times here, both your own and then other leaders in various roles. What is your relationship to fear?
I tell people fear is a cousin of failure. And we all face it. We all have fear. The successful people process these emotions differently. Emotional intelligence is high. So I'll cut right to the chase when a new hire comes in, for example. What's your greatest fear? You'll be shocked of what that answer is for different levels of personalities, careers, and their responses. And let's face it together. That's what I want to have my people know, is that FAIL stands for first attempt in learning. I'll tell young people, don't be afraid to fail. You have the advantage because you don't have an experience. So fail. And everything is a learning opportunity. So what's your greatest fear? Well, it could be, somebody dying. Well, you can't control that. So stay with things that you can control. Have a plan. That fear is a good thing. I feared boxing. I would throw up before a boxing match, but I boxed. I had to face fear, right? One of the greatest people that's inspired us is Rocky Balboa. Rocky Balboa, as fictionally as he is, he got people to the gym. We love the underdog, but he's fear and all that stuff. And that's the man you don't want to face, is the man that keeps coming, or the woman that keeps coming, that has no fear. They have fear, but they process it differently. So fear in itself is a motivator to me. And I surround myself with people that are really focused on, I'm afraid to fail. What? Do you think, there's tons of examples of successful people that have tons of failure, but they face that fear.
Yeah.
And they didn't let that fear stop them. Too many times we let fear win. We let fear win and stops us. Like, should I start a podcast? I'm afraid I'm not going to have any listeners. Right? Like, what's your greatest fear right now, Ken, as of today? What is your greatest fear? What would be your answer?
My greatest fear is always financial insecurity. That got driven, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and how it has shaped so much of what I do. Growing up in the circumstances that I did, it wasn't abject poverty, but it was so shaping that it drives so much. As I think about the difference between that scarcity and abundance mindset. So at least on the abundance side of recognizing there is so much opportunity, for me, it continually has to be a mental shift to go, yes, this is possible. These are the things that open up, but that's always at the core for me. There's plenty of other fears, but that is a core one. Yeah.
Me too. Me too. I think a lot of men, a lot of listeners would probably agree with you. A lot of men, that's constantly on our mind. As providers,
yeah,
it could all go away. And that used to keep me up at night. I experienced financial wealth, success, and I lost it. So I faced my greatest fear. It all went away. My grandmother says, I'll give you the last button off Gabe's coat. I didn't know who Gabe was, but I knew I was broke, and she gave me some help. I went from having all kinds of zeros in my bank account to having none. But what it taught me was that I could still live, just tighten up the bootstraps, and you lean into what you're good at. And then you start building it back up. So that's my greatest fear when we go out to some big fancy dinner. I'm already calculating how much is this. We're fine. We're fine spending this kind of money.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking about, should we be spending this kind of money when I could help somebody else? That's where my mindset has shifted, is how can I help now? My family will never go broke because I'm never going to stop. That drive in me, it's just in the DNA. But I think men in general, fathers, husbands, men in general, we're always thinking about that security. We're always thinking about that financial security. But what if it went away? You'll still be here. You still have your spirituality.
Yeah.
You still have your health. And what can you control? What can you control? It's crazy that our self-worth is based on playing time, money in our account, or what we perceive it is, because the biggest drivers is between our own head. You think that the next guy, but where the connection and magic happens is agreeing that our greatest fear, we share it. It doesn't matter what level we get to.
Yeah.
My greatest fear is it could go away tomorrow. But I know from the school of hard knocks that I come from, watch me rebuild. It's just in my DNA.
It's going to happen. Yep. It's a beautiful thing. Time has flown by, so I want to be respectful of your time, but got a couple different questions here. A lot of the things we've talked about have been kind of evergreen, if you will, but I'd like to come to the present moment and ask, what is your right now question? And I define that as something between what's for dinner and who am I going to get married if I'm going to get married, the simple to the bigger picture, and really kind of come down to the very much the present. So what is your right now question, or what are the questions that you're working with today?
What does success look like? That is a ever-changing, moving target. And passion. What is your passion? So you have to be thinking about what motivates you to reach that success. As I'm get up every morning, is what am I passionate about? I know that. What's my purpose in life? We're always chasing that purpose in life. But what is success? What is success, and what can you control? Those are super important questions I ask myself. I meditate every day after I pray. Just help me be respectful when somebody reaches out. That is a little win. That is a little success. But the big success picture, it's not money. It's impact. And to me, if I can provide impact, bring strategic value to any group, podcast, or anything I come in that day, that's a win. So I take my success on a daily basis and I reflect on it every day. So what does success look like? Sometimes we put success as something that's completely unachievable. I've achieved my dreams, and I realize there's other mountains to climb. I realize that there's other people to help, and there's other people that want to know, how did you do it? And sharing. And I'm still trying to climb that ladder, and I don't think you ever quit. You got to stop and reflect, but what does success look like to you? And define it. And it starts by just making the right decision when you wake up. And that's going to the gym for me. Right after I pray, meditate, and gym. It's in my itinerary. I have to do that. I can catch a flight at 6 a.m. I'm on the treadmill at 4 a.m.
Love the dedication. Yeah, and that's what's going to get you there. Yeah, beautiful.
Right now, question, my friend.
All right, that's a good one. All right, well, where's the best place for folks to track you down and to see the things that you're excited about?
Love to engage. I'm on all social channels from LinkedIn, but my website houses a lot of my story, a lot of stuff we talked about. There's deeper dives there. So robertdoore.com is where I encourage everybody to go. There's a place to reach out to me through there. I'm on LinkedIn if you're professionals, or if you just want to see how crazy I am on a social life. There's all those. I'm not a TikToker, but I'm on every other one.
Perfect. I will put links in the show notes to everything that we've talked about, all the different folks that you've mentioned. We'll get links for them, and also your website, Robert Doore. That's Door with an E, robertdoore.com. Gotcha. Robert, thank you for your time. Thank you for weaving together all of who you are and bringing that superpower to bear and helping to change lives. I appreciate that, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us a voice. Appreciate it, man. Let's do it again.
Yeah, sounds good.